What's good, YouTubers and YouTubettes? This is JBsports back again with another one. Upsets are what make the sport of boxing so special. Case in point, last night, George Kambosos, who was a 13-1 underdog, upset the apple cart when he defeated Teofimo Lopez, aka Mr. Takeover, via split decision. George Kambosos has came out and said that the tables have turned, quoting the great Errol Spence Jr. Remember, Errol Spence Jr. said how the tables have turned when Danny Garcia was looking to fight him after he had been chasing Danny Garcia and Keith Thurman when he was a young contender coming up in the welterweight division. And they was basically saying that he needed the weights, he needed to fight Terrence Crawford, he needed to do this, that, and the third, and then they could entertain a fight with him. And then the tables got turned. Danny Garcia ran to that ring. He was doing the Fox boxing show, and he ran up there and got in the ring and said he wanted Errol Spence Jr. next after Errol Spence Jr. became unified welterweight champion with a split decision victory over Sean Showtime Porter. Now, George Kambosos' promoter, Lou DiBella, Sweet Lou, is back in business. He's back in business. I was wondering what happened to those Sweet Lou, man. I hadn't seen him around in a while. You know, he got that little podcast he do with them little interviews, but you ain't seen him promoting a big fighter, a big-time fighter. You know, he had Sergio Martinez. I believe he thinks he's found his next Sergio Martinez in George Kambosos. And those guys have some of the same backstory, as both guys were not top prospects coming up in the sport of boxing. They worked hard and they was able to get better, improve their skill set, and they was able to ultimately become world champions. And just like he did with Sergio Martinez when Sergio Martinez knocked out Paul Williams in a knockout of the year, one hit a quitter, put him to sleep like he had given him some NyQuil. He was saying Sergio was a top dog. He was the money man in the middleweight division. He was right there with Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Triple G. That's what Lou DiBella was saying. He was saying he's right up there with those two guys who were the top guys in boxing at that time, along with Canelo Alvarez. But Canelo Alvarez hadn't achieved what Triple G had achieved at that point. He was still trying to basically come back from that shutout loss to Floyd Mayweather Jr. You know, he had just got through beating Ezreal Lara in a very controversial fight. He was setting the stage to fight Miguel Cotto and guys like that, but he hadn't made it up to that point. You know, the two top guys at the time was Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Triple G. You remember they were trying to make Floyd Mayweather Jr. move up 2 weight classes to fight Triple G, because those two guys were the number 1 and number 2 pound-for-pound fighters. Now, you had Andre Ward up there, too, that you could have made an argument that was probably number 2, but definitely at the lowest, the number 1 and number 3 pound-for-pound fighters at that time. With all that being said, Lou DiBella is back in business, man. And he's basically saying that, look, we're going to look for the bag in the next fight with George Kambosos. George Kambosos also said that his next fight will be in his backyard, as he's already climbed that mountain and went to a top fighter's backyard in his last 2 fights, as he beat Lee Selby in the UK, and he beat Teofimo Lopez in New York. So he said his next fight, since he's the champion, he's got the belts, they're going to have to come see him. He is the big baller shot caller. And a fight with Devin Haney, if it takes place, it would have to take place in Australia. Now, they got a big soccer stadium down there in Sydney, Australia. They could put that fight over there. He said they can have around 70 to 80,000 fans in attendance for that fight. That would be a great fight. That would be a great scene to watch on TV, too. So it remains to be seen if that's the fight they will get made next, but that's some of the possibilities that could transpire as far as George Kambosos' next opponent. So we will see what happens, and we will see what transpires. But George Kambosos is saying, I'm that dude. I'm the A-side. But if they truly are looking for the biggest bag in the sport of boxing, it's only one guy that they need to see, and that's Gervonta Tank Davis. He is the biggest money fight at 135 pounds. Now, the problem with that is going to be the negotiations. Will George Kambosos concede being the B-side when he got 3 of the 4 major belts? When he considers himself Undisputed / Unified. You know, he basically said you can call me whichever one you want to call me. You can call me Undisputed or you can call me Unified, but just call me champion at the end of the day. So he feels he's A side, but the drawing power is behind Gervonta Tank Davis. He's a guy that's selling out arenas. He's a guy that's done 2 pay-per-views, is about to do a 3rd pay-per-view. If it does good numbers, he's going to be saying he's A side. So I don't see that fight happening. The fight with Devin Haney will be very, very interesting. But that's a tricky fight. When asked about that fight, his promoter, Lou DiBella, said, yeah, we'll look at that, but we're going to look at a whole lot of other different scenarios, and we're going to look at the biggest fight. It's called prize fighting at the end of the day. But the way he answered that question, it didn't seem like he was too excited about a potential matchup with Devin Haney. So for that fight to take place, George Kambosos will have to overrule Lou DiBella, say, I want that fight, make it happen. It ain't just about the money, it's about the legacy. Kind of like what Canelo Alvarez did with Ezra Lara. When Golden Boy advised him not to take that fight, he insisted on that fight anyway, and the fight got made. I think he's going to have to do that anyway. I think Jojo Diaz did that with the Devin Haney fight. I don't think Oscar De La Hoya and Eric Gomez won that fight. They were trying to match the fight up with Ryan Garcia. Ryan Garcia got injured, but they was trying to tell Jojo Diaz to wait till Ryan Garcia get healed. Jojo Diaz said, nah, Ryan Garcia is a prima donna. You can't trust him. I can't trust him as far as I can throw him. I ain't finna wait on him and start on my career waiting on him. Something else will pop up. He already pulled out of the Fortuna fight citing depression. Now he pulled out of my fight saying he had an injury. Now he got a picture up on the YouTube with him in the hospital after surgery. So the guy was injured, but when you done pulled out of several fights, you know, a lot of people are going to be thinking your injury is a fugazi injury, even though it is a legitimate injury. With all that being said, George Kambosos is that dude. He is the one, in his opinion, that's going to tell his opponent, when he says jump, his opponent just needs to say how high. He is the guy that's going to call the shots, but that's going to be problematic, especially if you're talking about fighting Gervonta Tank Davis. Because the way they looking at it, they don't care nothing about no belts, per se. It's good to have a belt, but they want to look at, okay, what are you bringing to the table as far as revenue-wise? What kind of gate is you doing as an A-side fighter? How many pay-per-views have you done as an A-side fighter? And when you put the numbers together and you crunch the numbers, Gervonta Tank Davis has a higher drawing power than a George Kambosos. Now, George Kambosos might want to just take a voluntary defense over there in Australia against a top 10 contender in either the IBF, WBO, or the WBA, and fight them over there. And if you can draw 70,000 to 80,000 out there and produce a strong viewing audience and produce a strong live gate, then you can come to the table and with a little bit more leverage. But as of right now, man, you've never been an A-side fighter in a big fight. You're a B-side fighter. You won the belt, but you still haven't shown yourself to be a big draw in the sport of boxing. So I think he's kind of got the same kind of problem that Teofimo Lopez got. Hopefully he is not as delusional as Teofimo Lopez was. So when he comes to the negotiating table, he'll know his standing and know his status. Even though he is a unified champion, he is not the draw that a Gervonta Tank Davis is. And he's not even the draw that a Devin Haney is. Devin Haney was the A-side in the Yorkers Gamboa fight. That fight produced a certain amount of number with him, but he was the A-side. He was the A-side at the Jorge Linares fight. It did not sell out, but he was the A-side, and he can put those numbers up as an A-side fighter and say, look here, George Kambosos, you have never been an A-side fighter. So he might be advised to take a voluntary defense over there in Australia and produce a good number over there, you know, with the gate and the TV viewing audience, and then come to the table against the top fighters in the lightweight division. So we will see what happens, and we will see what transpires, but that's the latest and the greatest, as George Kambosos, the day after, is saying he's the emperor, and his next opponent is going to have to come see him in Australia. So we will see what happens, and we will see what transpires. You got a couple other opponents out there, Shakur Stevenson, but I don't think Shakur Stevenson is going to be the opponent next for George Kambosos, man. I think that stylistic matchup is all wrong for George Kambosos. That guy, Shakur Stevenson ain't like Teofimo Lopez. He's very accurate. He's going to use his jab. He's going to land combination punches. His defense is going to be way better than Teofimo Lopez. I wouldn't jump in there with him next. You know, unless Bob Arum come with the bag, which he is not known to do. I would not look at Shakur Stevenson. But those are some of the opponents that are being mentioned as a possible next fight for George Kambosos. Ryan Garcia, now that would be an interesting matchup. If they can get the negotiations resolve between those two, that would be a good fight. But again, Ryan Garcia has a social media following second to none. Only person that's comparable to is Gervonta Tank Davis. So he gonna feel he the A side. He gonna feel he's the high draw. He's the bigger name. Golden Boy and with Oscar De La Hoya and Eric Gomez, would they be willing to put him in there with a guy fighting at the level of a George Kambosos, fresh off of inactivity, fresh off of having surgery, fresh off of injury in the first fight? But that could be a good fight that I think would entice Lou DiBella and his team to take that fight. But that's a big money fight. I think Tank Davis and Ryan Garcia are the two biggest fighters if you're talking about making that biggest purse for George Kambosos. But again, both of those guys going to feel that they're A side, so they could be problematic in the negotiation. Now, Devin Haney, for the opportunity, might concede to be the B side fighter, but that's a tricky fight. That's a dangerous fight because that guy can box. He's very long. He's big for that weight. He knows how to control range, control distance. He's not going to be making the same defensive mistakes as Teofimo Lopez. He's a guy that's a very good combination puncher. He's a guy that has a good straight right hand. If he catches you with that right hand and you don't see it, he can drop you. The guy got underrated power, in my opinion, in Devin the Dream Haney. So that would be a tough matchup. You know, they will insist on that fight being in Australia, but that would be a very tricky matchup. You know, that would be one of them fights that, you know, I could easily see Devin Haney winning that fight 9 rounds to 3, 8 rounds to 4. But will Devin Haney get a decision in Australia in front of 70 to 80,000 rabid Australian fans? Will his team be willing to go down there and take that chance of getting robbed in a fight? All that comes into play when you're talking about a possible matchup with George Kambosos and Devin the Dream Haney. Let me know your thoughts about George Kambosos and who you think he should fight in his next fight. And should the fight take place in Australia or should the fight take place here in the U.S.? Let me know your thoughts and subscribe to JB Sports, the man, the myth, the legend. And I holla.